Hey everyone, Chloe here, and welcome back to this feminine community. And if you are new here, ladies and lurkers and ear hustlers, welcome. So today's feminine school video is all about a very long overdue and a very touchy topic that is often a struggle with many women who are on a very focused and a very committed feminine journey. And that is the topic of how to leave others behind and on how to handle trauma dumping, and to a larger degree, the codependent issue of trying to rescue and save friends and family members who are 10 toes down and who are committed to the same old lifestyle and a mindset of outright dysfunction. And this is an issue that a lot of women, particularly Black women, tend to internally struggle with and go back and forth with when it comes to the personal commitment of breaking generational curses and of escaping the very powerful narrative that to be a Black woman means being an integral part of the warrior class. Because in many cases, Black women are the bedrock of their communities and their families. So the decision to become a more feminine woman can become a pretty isolating experience and existence, which is why I started my feminine school, The New Feminine, to build a healthy feminine community. And shout out to The New Feminine, where women can learn how to become more sophisticated and more savvy in their mindsets, and where women can learn how to stretch their feminine wings, and more importantly, a place where women can feel safe to express themselves and to express their frustrations without the hateful trolling and the interfering comments of manosphere incels and low-value men and dust bunny pygmies and the jealous masculinas who are always lurking around looking to start deflections, beefs, and arguments. Because oftentimes on the feminine journey, it can be very isolating. It can feel very isolating and very lonely trying to become healthy and trying to heal both the damaged parts and the traumas that you've inherited. So the thought of leaving the familiar and the thought of leaving the others that we know and love behind can become downright crippling and scary. Now, before we get into trauma dumping, a little bit of house cleaning, because to be clear, we all want good friends and we all want to be loved and heard and understood, and no one wants to be alone or without friends or community or without people that we can rely upon or people that we can trust. And if you are a woman who has a best friend that you can trust and a friend that is just as committed to growing and evolving as you are, consider yourself incredibly lucky, as friendships especially tend to implode or to self-destruct or to show their true colors when one woman is experiencing the glow up of the feminine journey and the other woman isn't. Which brings me to the topic of this video, and that is trauma dumping. Now, what exactly is trauma dumping? Trauma dumping is essentially a person who is the CEO of excuses, as they are addicted to the merry-go-round of complaining or of the oppression Olympics, or they are addicted to the attention of being a victim, or is a person who loves to emotionally vomit onto others, and they tend to have more baggage than Spirit Airlines. And they are generally people who love to spread their woe is me narrative without zero intention. And that is the key word here, ladies, intention. They have zero intention of ever fixing or of ever seeking out a solution for their struggles, their depression, their anxiety, or for their regrets. Trauma dumpers are also known as high maintenance energy vampires, battery zappers, and are otherwise people that tend to leave you emotionally depleted and drained when you are in relationship or in proximity with them. This is especially true if they have a very strong, self-absorbed, narcissistic nature, as narcissistic people are notoriously self-focused. They lack reciprocity and they are unable to naturally give without first extracting as much as they can take. And takers are generally overconsumed with getting their needs met by depleting others by any means necessary. And should you ever decide to stop making yourself an easy mark or a doormat or a pushover, then all of a sudden that memory will become very selective and you will no longer be remembered as the generous, nice girl or the underdog, because now you're the supervillain. all because you decided to make a shift to put your feminine needs first. So why is this lesson very important when it comes to femininity? Because femininity requires the protection of boundaries. Femininity requires protection. It requires rest, restoration, and rejuvenation. And it cannot flourish in its feminine softness while it is being threatened by takers and by people who lack boundaries, or by people who are committed to maintaining the status quo. And our femininity, ladies, cannot flourish when we are overextending ourselves by pouring into an empty cup that is essentially a bottomless pit of need. Trauma dumpers, ladies, are experts at hunting down people who have a very strong humanitarian spirit, and they are always on the hunt for sympathy and attention, and they are experts at guilt tripping and manipulation to get their personal needs met. And with many giving women, their giving is a blind spot. Perhaps you were raised in the role reversal of parentification, which many of you know by now is role reversal between a child and their parents, which is more common than you think. Or perhaps you were raised by a narcissistic mother or a father, or both parents were narcissistic, as narcissistic parents will usually mold and shape their children to be a sacrificial lamb or to be outright people pleasers who will often grow up to become desperate and thirsty for any kind of validation. Or perhaps it has simply been your nature to be a compassionate person, and generally nurses, teachers, and social workers can become deeply entangled with trauma dumpers. Trauma dumpers are experts at spotting out and scouting out a sympathetic and a compassionate ear, and they will take advantage of others to the point of drain and abuse. And some feathers are going to be ruffled by this video, but this channel is all about growth and expansion and learning how to become a feminine receiver. So here are 9 key insights to learn about trauma dumping. Number 9, ladies, friendships are not a surrogate or a substitute for professional therapy. Many friendships are often ruined by trauma dumping because a trauma dumper will often misuse and mistake their friendships as a source of therapy in order to avoid the deeper necessary work that is required of healing. In friendships, trauma dumpers will often toe the line of empathy from others until it snaps. Ladies, your friendships are not a replacement to fix your deep childhood wounds, your childhood trauma, or your personal history of abuse and neglect. Number 8, trauma dumpers tend to be very myopic in their belief that their personal problems are the only problems in the world, or they tend to believe that their problems should take front and center precedence over anyone else's. And due to their selfishness, they tend to believe that they have suffered more than others and that others have not suffered as much as them, as if suffering is a competition. In reality, everyone has personal problems and everyone suffers and everyone has a struggle. And you should never allow anyone to minimize your struggles over theirs. Number 7, ladies, if you are struggling with developing stronger boundaries, I suggest that you ask yourself the very important question of why. 10 times out of 10, it will more than likely point to some kind of childhood issue of being taught to please others at the expense of yourself. Number 6, ladies, you cannot fix someone who is addicted to looking for sympathy. Trauma dumpers are notoriously avoidant of solutions, will play the blame game ad nauseum, and will jump through a circus ring on fire to avoid looking at the man in the mirror. Number 5, people who are committed to looking for sympathy are notoriously stagnant and are people who are least likely to grow, to evolve, or to mature. And yes, some women will hate to hear it, but just because a person is older doesn't mean that they are wiser. And generally, over time, a trauma dumper tends to become a broken record of the same old, same old. And trust me, ladies, you do not want to become a woman who gets caught up into that very strong victim narrative trap. Number 4, ladies, you cannot repair someone who basically has zero intention of doing the healing work that is necessary to improve their personal lives. So if a person isn't taking action to improve themselves, stop trying to rescue them, because they will only continue to drown you in their mess. Number 3, ladies, you cannot feel guilty for outgrowing a person who is committed to the status quo. There will always be people in the world who are happy being unhappy and who are fixed and calcified in their mindsets. And some feathers will be ruffled to hear this, but some people will rather cling on to their suffering for dear life because their suffering is not only comfortable, but their suffering is familiar. Number 2, ladies, you are not responsible for fixing, repairing, or mopping up the mess that an irresponsible adult has made for themselves. And yes, this includes your mother, your father, and your siblings. And number 1, as my grandma and my great grandma used to say, you can lead a horse to the water, but you cannot make them drink it. Ladies, you cannot force someone to heal. You cannot force a person to see the light if they do not want it for themselves. And you cannot make a person get up from the table of dysfunction until he or she is ready to move. So how do you handle a trauma dumper? By telling them in a very assertive way that you aren't qualified to fix their problems, or by telling them that you do not have the capacity or the bandwidth to hold the space for the problems that they aren't willing to solve themselves. And whether they like it or not, always suggest the services of a therapist so that the choice to heal remains completely up to them. Instead of allowing a trauma dumper to dump all of their painful baggage onto you while you both sink into the sunken place. Ladies, always remember that it is your job to protect your feminine divine and that you cannot give from an empty cup. When we give from an empty cup, that is when we are most irritable, grouchy, resentful, testy, snappy, and annoyed. So as a femininity leader and influencer, I highly suggest that you only give from a space of overflow and that you only pour into others when you have fully poured into yourself. This is a feminine rule that I stick by, that I live by, and it has worked wonders in my feminine life. So that is all that I have to say on this for now. Ladies, your femininity is sacred, is precious, and is very delicate, and is oh so worthy of protection. But let me know down below if you've ever struggled with wanting to rescue a person who's committed and who is super glued to remaining the same. And as always, I look forward to reading your testimonies, your shared stories, and your responses to the topic of trauma dumping below. And as always, stay tuned for more Feminine School videos to come. And I will catch up with you ladies and lurkers and ear hustlers in the next one.